Hello all, and welcome to this presentation and demonstration of prediction of marriage with timing using the KP principles. In this video, we will look at the KP principles that help in predicting the marriage, whether a marriage would take place, the promise of a marriage, and also the timing of a marriage based on, again, uh, the principles of Krishnamurti Paddhati. I will take a sample chart here. This sample chart belongs to a male. The date of birth, the place of birth, and the time of birth are indicated. And for Krishnamurti's prediction, we use the KP Amsa. And based on that, using an appropriate software whose accuracy has been tested, the planetary positions have been identified. I present to you here the KP Lagna and the KP Cusp chart. For users who are new to Krishnamurti Paddhati, I would recommend that we understand the difference between a KP Lagna and a KP Cusp chart, and that is not something that we intend covering in the scope of this video. The positions of the planet in the Lagna chart and the specific Rashis are shown. The actual position of the planets with respect to the houses is shown in the KP Cusp chart. The native here is a Leo ascendant, and the position of the planets in the different Rashis, in the different nakshatras, has been indicated. The tabulation also indicates the Rashi lords, the nakshatra lords, and the sublords. And well, what do we mean by the Rashi lord? The Rashi lord is the lord of the zodiac. In Krishnamurti Paddhati, the constellations are very important. These constellations are termed as nakshatras, and each nakshatra has a ruler. One of the planets would be the ruler of the nakshatra, so that's the nakshatra lord. And then we have the concept of sublord, which is unique to Krishnamurti Paddhati. And based on the principles of Krishnamurti Paddhati, planets will first deliver the results of the lord of the constellation in which they are deposited, and then give their own results. A table of the planetary subs and the effects is seen here. So what we have in the table 1 is the planetary position. Table 2 gives the degrees of the cusps. The KP, Lagna, and the cusp chart we've already seen here in chart 1. And then the significators of the different planets. So we have Sun. Sun is the lord of the first house. As we said, it's a Leo ascendant. Yeah, what we would want to highlight here is what we see here is the Sun is in the 4th and the 5th house. Likewise, we see Rahu is in the 2nd and the 3rd house, and Ketu is in the 8th and the 9th house. Now, this is something which is an area that needs further discussion and research, and it would not be appropriate to be bringing up this discussion in this video. However, let us explain the concept. So let's look at the location of the Sun. Now, Sun here in the KP Lagna chart is in the 5th house, but as we can see in the cusp chart, it is in the 4th house. Now, the position of the cusp, okay, that is the position of the 5th house cusp, as we can see, is Sagittarius, 8 degrees at 58 minutes with 57 seconds, whereas the Sun is in Sagittarius, 7 degrees, 33 minutes and 15 seconds. So you can see there's a difference of about a little more than 1 degree, 1.5 degree to be precise, in the position of the cusp and the position of the Sun. While Sun will travel just 1 degree in every day, the cusp travels much faster. Typically in every 4 minutes, the cusp transcends about 1 degree. And therefore, in this case, Sun is considered to be at the cusp of the 4th and the 5th house. Hence, it will signify and deliver results of both in the 4th and the 5th house. Likewise, Rahu will deliver the results of the 2nd and the 3rd house, and Ketu will deliver the results of the 8th and 9th house. The Sun, by its ownership, will deliver the results of the 1st house, and then by its position, in this case, because of the cusp, will deliver the positions of the 4th and the 5th house. Planets which do not fall near the cusp, well, they will just deliver the results of the house that they are deposited. As you can see here, moon in the cuspal chart is deposited in the fifth house. So likewise, the table has been generated. That is the position of the planets. And then the constellations in which each planet is deposited. So Sun is deposited in the constellation of Ketu, and hence the significators of Ketu, which we see here, that translate into the thing, into the tabulation here. And then Sun is in the sub of Rahu. So planets are in the position of the constellation and in the position of the sub. That's how the exact degree of the planets gets defined as far as Krishnamurti Paddhati is concerned. Another word which I would like to bring to the attention is anybody watching this video, certainly it is important to have the fundamental principles of KP astrology understood. That is how you will be able to interpret. The objective of this video is to demonstrate how using KP principles, the exact date and timing, the promise of marriage can be established. And this is a very good example. And once you understand the example, you can develop your own template and apply the same sequence, the same process, and I'm sure you will very soon understand and with practice master the art of prediction using KP astrology. Having now understood the tabulations, let's look at the principles of KP astrology related to marriage. So let's first understand the rules that we have here. That's the prediction rules as per Krishnamurti Paddhati. Okay. So in Vedic astrology, we generally tend to look at the seventh house. In Krishnamurti Paddhati, we look at houses 2, 7, 11 for marriage, and then we look at Venus, which is the chief governor of matrimony. Okay. Now, why do we look at these three houses? The seventh house is a house of union, a legal bondage, and partnership. Well, marriage is a legal bond and a partnership for life. The second house represents family, which expands whenever a new member gets added to the family. And well, in marriage, a new member gets added to the family. So we look at the seventh house. The 11th house is the house of permanent friendship and the fulfillment of desires. So that is the reason, that is the logic why we look at the second house, the seventh house, and the 11th house in Krishnamurti Paddhati. The first question that we need to answer is marriage promised for the native? And according to Krishnamurti Paddhati, the answer to this question is provided by the sublord of the seventh cusp. So let us understand what do we mean by the sublord of the seventh cusp. We will look at the tables that we just described above, and we will identify the sublord of the seventh cusp. So what is the rule? The rule says that if the sublord of the seventh cusp is a significator of houses 2 or 7 or 11, then marriage is promised. Well, fairly straightforward in application of the rule, and we will see how the rule can be applied. And when does marriage happen? Well, marriage will happen once promised in the conjoined periods of the significators of houses 2, 7, and 11. So we will understand what do we mean by the significators of houses 2, 7, 11 through the example. And let us move our attention now to the chart that we have looked at, the chart that we just saw above. So the first thing that we will look at is the marriage promised. So the seventh cusp in the chart falls at 8 degrees 8 minutes and 43 in Aquarius. Let me just show you from the chart how we read the position of the seventh cusp. This is the KP house division. This is the tabulation that we produced using the software. And we talked about the seventh cusp. So the seventh cusp is Aquarius, 8 degrees, 8 minutes and 43 seconds. It is in the nakshatra of Satataratra, or what we call as Sadvishta. This nakshatra is owned by Rahu. Aquarius is the sign ruled by Saturn, and the sublord of this seventh cusp again is Rahu. Now, what the KP rule says is that the sublord of the seventh cusp, if it is a significator of houses 2 or 7 or 11, then marriage is promised. Now here the sublord of the seventh cusp is the Rahu. We need to check whether Rahu signifies any of the three houses, 2, 7 or 11. And to identify that, we would look at the table here. That is the table of planetary subs and their effects. And we are looking at the seventh cuspal sublord, which is the Rahu. And Rahu here, as we can see, is a significator of the second and the third house, as we described. It is located in the cusp, and hence it will give the results in the second and third house. Rahu is in the sign of Libra, and Libra is ruled by Venus. So Venus here happens to be the lord of the third house and the 10th house. So Rahu signifies houses 2, 3, and 10. Rahu is in its own star of Rahu, and well, that has the same significators. In fact, in this case, Rahu also happens to be in its own sub. So Rahu, by and large, signifies houses 2, 3, and 10. And the rule that we applied for Krishnamurti Paddhati for marriage is it should be a significator of houses 2 or 7 or 11. So what we see here is Rahu is a significator of house 2 at the level of the planet, at the level of the constellation. And well, the final result is coming by the sublord, and the sublord confirms again, because of presence of Rahu, that marriage is promised here. So the first part of the answer is whether the marriage is promised for the native is answered. So yeah, that's pretty much what we just discussed. And yeah, that's the conclusion. Since the sublord of the seventh cusp signifies the second house, marriage is promised for this native. We did mention that we also need to look at Venus, the governor of marriage. So Venus, the chief governor of marriage, well, again, how do we find out the position of Venus? We will go back to the table here. And we can see Venus itself is deposited in the sign of Capricorn. And that's the degree in which Venus is deposited, is in the Shravana nakshatra, in the zodiac of Capricorn, ruled by Saturn, in the constellation, Shravana constellation, ruled by the moon, and Venus happens to be in its own sub. So the position of Venus is defined here, and then the significators of Venus. So we saw how to read the significators of Rahu. We'll now read the significators of Venus. So Venus deposited in the 6th house and the lord of 3 and 10. In the star of or the constellation of Moon, which is deposited in the 5th house and is the lord of the 12th. So Venus will give the results of Moon, which is the results of the 5th house, the 12th house, and will deliver its own results, which is 6th house, 3rd house, and 10th house. The final confirmation on the quality of results will be the sublord of Venus, which is again delivering results of 6, 3, and 10. Now 6, 3, rather 6, 10, and 12 aren't very good combinations when it comes to marriage. And they are detrimental to marriage. In fact, Krishnamurti Paddhati's rules, and even in Vedic astrology, the 12th house from any house tends to negate the results of that house. So 6th house is the 12th from 7th. Likewise, 10th house is the 12th from the 11th house, and hence these are detrimental. However, the Krishnamurti principles also state that the nodes are stronger than the planets. So here, Rahu and Ketu are the two nodes, and what we have seen is Rahu, the 7th cuspal sublord, is deposited in Libra, which is ruled by Venus. What this does is this makes Rahu stronger than Venus, and therefore Rahu will deliver the results during its period. And Rahu, if it's a significator of 2, 7, and 11, as we saw, Rahu is a significator of the second house, will definitely deliver the results as regards marriage. So the first part of the chart has been to check the promise of marriage. Now we shall predict the timing of marriage. Timing of marriage, we mean the Dasha, the Bhukti, and the Antara. Well, this is a chart wherein the native is born in 1976. So at this point of time, certainly the native is married. So we will look at rather how we went about making this prediction or explanation on validating the KP principles. Just a few rules that we would like to bring to the attention of all the viewers here. So KP's rule on the order of significators of the house. So what are the significators which tend to be more important than the others, or when you look at the planets which are more likely to deliver the results, which of them are more likely to deliver? The principles of Krishnamurti Paddhati are very clear in this, and the planets which are installed, which are in the constellation of the occupants of a house, they will deliver the results first. Second, the occupants of a given house will deliver the results. Third, the planets in the constellation of the owner of the house. And fourth, the owners of the house. So the rules are very clear, and that is how we identify which significators will be more important. And again, I would, for those who are not very clear about these principles, I would recommend you to read the KP readers and some examples to understand this. We will show a live example here and identify the significators for marriage using this principle. So first, we look at the second house. Okay, I would first, kind of take your attention back to the chart, and one important principle to be understood is the Lagna chart is to be seen for the position of planets in a specific Rashi. But with regards to position of planets in a specific house, we need to refer to the cusp chart. So in this case now, we are looking at the position of planets. So we see here that Rahu is a planet which is deposited in the second house. Mercury, because it happens to be the lord of the second house. The zodiac here is Virgo, and so we have Mercury as the lord of the second house, and we now need to look at the planets in the constellation of Rahu and in the constellation of Mercury, as we just looked at. So occupant of the house here happens to be Rahu, owner of the house is Mercury. Now Mercury is the lord of the second house, and Mars and Saturn are in the star of Mercury. I repeat, Mercury is the lord of the second house, Mars and Saturn are in the star of Mercury. How do we identify which are the planets which are in the star of Mercury? Let us come back to this chart here. This is Saturn. Now Saturn, as it can be seen, is deposited in the star of Mercury. Likewise, Mars is deposited in the star of Mercury. Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto in Vedic astrology or in Krishnamurti, we would not give importance to these. So I am eliminating these three planets here. And if you look at the table here, we have in the star of Mercury, we have two planets, Mars and Saturn. So we come back to the table here. Mercury is the lord of the second house. Mars and Saturn are in the star of Mercury. So by this rule, the owner of the house is Mercury. Okay, it is likely to deliver the result, but Mars and Saturn, being the planets in the constellation of the owner of the house, are more powerful compared to Mercury for delivering the results. However, the occupant of the house, that is Rahu. So Rahu is deposited in the second house. Rahu is even more strong when compared to Mars and Saturn. And planets in the constellation of the occupant of the house. So Rahu is the occupant of the house. Let us see which are the planets which are in this constellation of Rahu. As we can see here that well, Rahu, you know, the only planet which is in the constellation of Rahu is Rahu itself. So Rahu becomes a very, very strong significator as a level 1 and a level 2 significator. So Rahu is the strongest significator of the second house. Well, the others are important as well, but we've just identified which one is the stronger. Likewise, Saturn is the lord of the seventh house. There is no planet in the constellation of Saturn. There is no planet in the seventh house. Thus, Saturn is the strongest significator of the seventh house. I will quickly run through the tabulation here. As we can see here, there is no planet in the seventh house. Saturn is the lord of the seventh house. There are no planets which are deposited in the constellation of Saturn. Therefore, it makes Saturn as the only and the strongest significator of the seventh house. And in the same way, Mercury happens to be Mercury is the lord of the, well, this should read as 11th house. Mars and Saturn are in the star of Mercury. We saw that there is no planet in the 11th house. So again, we have Mars, Saturn, and Mercury. So for the sake of clarity, the significators of the second house are Rahu, Mars, Saturn, Mercury. The significator of the seventh house is Saturn. The significator of the 11th house is Mars, Saturn, Mercury. These are the planets which signify marriage, and we will see how they play their part in the marriage of the native. Now, we first need to identify the planet which will, in its Dasa, give marriage. And there is a concept called as ruling planets, which can be applied in this case. Well, the marriage has already taken place. We are doing an analysis, so I would not explain that principle. Let us look at when the specific Dasa was operating for the native. So the Rahu Dasa operated for this native at the age of 22, from the age of 22 until the age of 40. The Rahu Dasha actually started in 1998. And as we have seen here, that Rahu is a strong significator of the second house. Well, 22 to 40, that is the age generally when you expect people to get married. After the Rahu Dasha is the Jupiter Dasha. We don't see Jupiter giving marriage here, so we narrow down on the Rahu Dasha. Having found the Rahu Dasha, we need to find out the Antar Dasha, or the Bhukti rather, the period in which, the sub-period in which the marriage is likely to take place. And well, we first have the Rahu Dasha. Well, marriage did not happen then. Then the Rahu Jupiter. Jupiter is not a significator. The next is Rahu Saturn. And the Rahu Saturn period here, operated from October 2003 to August 2006. Now, Saturn, as we can see, appears to be a very strong significator. It is a significator not only of the second house, but the strongest significator of the seventh house and the only significator of the seventh house, and the significator of the 11th house. So Rahu Saturn period is the period where the native is definitely likely to get married. And that is exactly what happened. Saturn being a strong significator, the actual period when the marriage happened was in Rahu Dasa, Saturn Bhukti, and Antara of Saturn. So Saturn being the lord of the seventh, the strongest significator of the seventh, gave marriage to the native in its Dasa and Bhukti. The marriage actually happened on 17th December 2003. Well, this is not a prediction that we are making now, and hence this is just an analysis. But the purpose of demonstrating this was how, using the significators of the houses which give marriage, that is houses 2, 7, and 11, the periods during which the marriage is likely to happen can be identified. Having done that, we have demonstrated that the Dasa conforms with the principles of KP. We looked at how marriage promise was there. We looked at how the Dasa is there. It would be also useful to understand that events will happen when planets transit specific points in the chart. These are some critical points in the chart. So let us look at the date of the marriage here, which is 17th December 2003, and try to relate uh, the positions of the transiting planets on this date. Now, as per the Krishnamurti Paddhati rules, the KP rules, the planets which are the Dasa Lord and the Bhukti Lord, these are the planets whose transits should be seen. The transit of the ascendant, the transit of the moon, the sun, the moon and the sun are the two luminaries which are known to trigger events. And hence the transit of these planets at the time of the event is to be studied. So at the time of marriage, which was on 17th December 2003 at about 1800 hours in Mumbai, let us look at how these planets were transiting. What we would like to highlight here is that the presence of significators that we saw, related to houses 2, 7, and 11, which bring marriage, they are very, very evident. We are talking about these planets here: Rahu, Mars, Saturn, Mercury. Okay, these are the four planets which can be seen here. So the ascendant on 17th of ascendant or the Lagna was transiting Gemini, and it was transiting 1 degree and 1 minute in Gemini. And Gemini is a sign ruled by Mercury in the star of Mrigashira, which is ruled by Mars, and in the sub of Mercury. So the ascendant was actually transiting Mercury, Mars, Mercury. Strong significators of houses 2, 7, 11. Moon was transiting its own nakshatra, the Hasta nakshatra, but in the Virgo sign, which is again ruled by Mercury. So the presence of Mercury is seen here. The Dasa Lord, Rahu. Rahu was transiting Bharni nakshatra, which is ruled by Venus, in the sign of Aries, which is ruled by Mars. So we can see here the presence of Mars when it comes to the transit of Rahu. Finally, the Bhukti Lord and the Antara Lord Saturn. Saturn was transiting Gemini, again ruled by Mercury, in the star of Rahu, which is the Dasha Lord, and in the sub of Venus. So these planets are seen to be transiting the significators of 2, 7, 11. Mercury is very, very evident here. Mercury has played its part, and the presence of Mercury is noteworthy. Mercury happens to be the Lord of 2 and 11, deposited in the 5th house in the natal chart. Well, this was a love marriage, and Mercury in the 5th house does indicate it is a love marriage. Well, the day of the marriage was also a Wednesday. Wednesday is ruled by Mercury, so Mercury played its part even here. And Moon was in the Virgo sign, ruled by Mercury, so we again have Mercury here. And the ascendant was transiting Gemini, ruled by Mercury, in the sub of Mercury. And the Lord of 7th house, Saturn, was also in Gemini, ruled by Mercury. So at the time of marriage, Mercury was deposited in the 7th house, which also happens to be the house of marriage, in the star of Venus and sub of Rahu. So all in all, Mercury did play its part in giving marriage to this native. I have known this native, and I know Mercury as a Lord of 2 and 11 has brought gains. Also, it is important to understand what was the position of the sun at the time of marriage. So sun was transiting in Sagittarius 1 degree 19 in the Mula nakshatra, ruled by Ketu. Well, what is so important about the Mula nakshatra? Well, in the natal chart too, sun is in the Mula nakshatra at 7 degree 33 15 seconds. So sun was actually in the same nakshatra at the time of transit, or rather at the time of the marriage, and as it was at the time of the birth. Well, Sun also happens to be deposited in the seventh house of marriage during transit. So, well, very good example here that we have looked at, where we understood how the sublord gives the promise of marriage, and how the significators of the second, 7, and 11 give us the timing of the marriage, the Dasa, Bhukti, and the Antara, and how these can also be validated, or rather, the transits, how the transits also conform to the prediction, or the rules of prediction that Professor Krishnamurti has delivered. So yeah, well, Krishnamurti Paddhati is a very good technique and very systematic approach to making predictions. And I wish you all the best in making your predictions. And thank you for watching this video. Thank you. My name is Jayesh Tekchandaney, just in case